So I am in the studio today with a very talented woman, very an executive that I've met just within the last 6 months, and I am so excited to be having this conversation with you. So in the studio today, I have Brenna Butler Garcia, who has been a force for good in San Joaquin County. And
You.
I'm so excited just to be able to just have a conversation, just to understand a little bit more about your background and to be able to share that with our listening community. But I'm just going to begin, giving just a little bit of just some what I call stats about you. Currently vice president for community relations for the AG Spanos companies.
Mhm.
Um, I first found out about you not only through that role, but as I was doing my work and trying to understand who were the leaders in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. Well, people said, "Did you know that Brenna was also a former CEO of the San Joaquin Hispanic Chamber of Commerce?" I was like, "Wow, I didn't know that." And then as I obviously to prepare for this, since I've known you, you've gotten a remarkable appointment for one of the most important foundations in the state of California, which is the Irvine Foundation, to sit on their board. I know about the Irvine Foundation as a longtime higher education leader. Irvine Foundation was one of the made early investment in California universities to ensure that we had diverse personnel. So literally, I can think of specific professors that are the very best in their fields. And Irvine was made investments in those individuals who are now all rock stars. They're all throughout the country. A lot of them are still in California. But the Irvine grant was the seed money that made that happen. And so I worked with Irvine Grant over the last 20 years of seeing their good work, and knowing that you're a member of their board is really exciting. And also, you're currently what is called an at-large board member for the California Hispanic Chambers of Commerce. So,
Yes.
so there's a lot of things, but you and I are also engaged in something that's called an iHub. And so, what I'm going to do is I'm going to let you talk a little bit about iHub. But even then, before we get into the iHub, this podcast is really about leadership. And because I'm a social justice educator, because I have been building capacity, particularly in the California context, for over 30 years, to think about how do we help individuals from oftentimes diverse and marginalized backgrounds find their voice, find their way, get the education that they need, get the job they need, so that we can, build more robust, inclusive communities. That's kind of where my headspace has been for these last 30 years. This podcast is also about identity, because you can't separate identity out from leadership.
Absolutely.
And so I'm going to, first of all, thank you so much for being with us today, and maybe ask you to start, our conversation talking a little bit about, your leadership, but thinking about your identity and the ways in which your identity has really kind of been part of who you are becoming,
Mhm.
in these kind of remarkable leadership roles you've undertaken so far.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'm so happy to be here. So thank you. Um, yes, I wear a lot of hats
Mhm.
in the community, but really the reason that I'm able to wear all these hats is
Mhm.
because I work for a company and a family that very much believes in
Mhm.
community,
Mm.
and they believe in the betterment of Stockton,
Mhm.
in our San Joaquin Valley, and they are willing to deploy the resources necessary to help this community thrive.
Mm.
And so, one of the ways that we're able to do that is by participating in these different organizations and being able to lend our background, thoughts, feelings, expertise, sometimes influence,
Mhm.
um, to to a greater agenda that benefits our region.
Mhm.
And so the iHub was really something that was partially founded by
Mhm.
our company, the Spanos companies.
Uh-huh.
Originally joined forces with the County of San Joaquin to vie for the opportunity to have the Innovation Hub designation under the it was Governor Brown's
I
administration.
see. So explain to the our listening audience what is iHub? I with a HUB.
So it is an innovation hub.
Mm-hmm.
And really, the purpose of the innovation hubs throughout the state, and I think in the beginning there were 13 designated, we have 10 today.
Yeah.
The purpose was to spark new technologies and innovation in regions that were lacking.
Yes.
And what we saw in San Joaquin County was that there was an immense opportunity to build off major employment sectors. So healthcare, sustainable construction techniques, ag business.
Yeah.
And how do we look for sparking new types of technology or innovation or growth that would attract interest from Silicon Valley, from the Central Coast? And how did we bring that kind of economic development and opportunity to San Joaquin County? And so it started with basically representation from all of the cities in the county itself, our local Economic Development Corporation, which is a public-private partnership, Spanos companies, and a few others. And from there, it's really grown from the development of our board. University of Pacific is an active member of the iHub today. The Port of Stockton is. We have small business incubators that have been a part of that. And then we've really been able to expand our community footprint with our iHub Advisory Council. And through that, we have our ethnic and minority chambers from throughout the region, our small business incubators and accelerators. We have folks from outside our region that are interested in pursuing opportunities in San Joaquin County. For instance, Port Product Labs out of Oakland. We have Opportunity Stanislaus to the south of us that is now engaged. And it's really become an opportunity for us to grow threads outside of our own region and recruit opportunities here to San Joaquin County. So it continues to evolve and expand. And I think it provides immense opportunity and interest in our region. So there's so many different things that are happening right now with sort of the flood of revenues that have come through.
Related to post-COVID.
Post-COVID, exactly. But there's also been, I think, a very deliberate and different outlook on how we can do economic development in our region in a way that's inclusive, that does not gentrify our communities, but it skills people up within their communities so that they're able to enhance their quality of life. And if you look at what we've been involved in on a larger level, even through our affiliation now with the James Irvine Foundation. James Irvine Foundation designated Stockton as one of its priority communities in 2021. And it really, the foundation has a North Star, what they call their North Star mission, which is to advance low-wage workers in California, and to do that with to better their quality of life economically. And so with that comes even additional opportunities, and we see how interest in private philanthropy in this region is now being complemented really by the efforts from the state with the SURF funding, or the Community Economic Resiliency Fund. And when we start layering all these opportunities on top of each other, it's going to platform us to the next level, where we can start to really embrace some of these changes and create positive outcomes for Stocktonians, for our San Joaquin Valley residents.
Absolutely. So what you just described is this ecosystem that I see that you are in the middle of, and you're also making connections as both a convener, because you and I sit on this iHub, and I'm able to see various leaders from various vantage points, geographic, various things that they bring to the table. I'm coming in as a higher education leader from the University of the Pacific. But one of the things that I have noted in your leadership that it is very much community centered and community anchored. And it's also it's also leveraging the assets that people bring. Um, and at the same time, one of the reasons I think that we have these great opportunities is because of how our region and in many ways how our city has had these kind of significant needs, economic needs, right? There's a reason why the Irvine Grant and its analysis has targeted a city like Stockton because Stockton, at the very, which is my home city, is at the intersection of all the opportunities as well as at the center of a lot of the issues and challenges that we've seen in society. And so there's a lot around the work that you do as a leader that is really driven by equity and inclusion. It's at the very core of what we're trying to do. So talk a little bit about, even from the time your work you're doing now, the work you're doing for the statewide Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, or the work you did when you were leading the San Joaquin Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. What do you see are some of the needs, particularly with communities of color, communities that have traditionally not have had the financial investment, that didn't have access to the capital that they needed? One of the reasons why these ethnic and cultural chambers of commerce existed, if you look at even at Black chambers of commerce throughout the United States, is because they were shut out of the economic capital. When they started popping up in the 20s and 30s and 40s in all these states, and California is included in that. So any state, any historic Black Chamber of Commerce can really kind of do a breakdown of how they were excluded and how they had to band together. And then we've seen different immigrants in different communities of color come together and do the same thing in order to propel their community and try to create opportunity for themselves and for their families as well as others. And so, talk a little bit about, your work in not only equity and inclusion, but, how your own identity and what you've seen around, this work and trying to help society and help us do better,
Well, I'll start off with a little bit of history around our local Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and sort of what I recognized in that role as CEO. If I had a dime for every time somebody said, "Why do you need a Hispanic Chamber of Commerce?" I'd be rich. I will tell you that the Hispanic Chamber, many ethnic chambers, grew out of a need. And to be frank, that need was they were marginalized from the greater business community. I think that many of our organizations have evolved into organizations that serve somewhat of a different purpose, but also have new relationships, have new collaborations and connections. But that said, they are rooted in being established because they represented a marginalized community.
Absolutely.
And I think that today what we see is that there's still challenges with our business communities in the disadvantaged populations, marginalized communities. We're looking at folks that may have language challenges, that could have systemic trust issues with government, with entities of authority, with law enforcement. And so I think that having your local minority and ethnic chambers of commerce is a really important role to fulfill in the community. I feel like they represent a source of trust and a source of information, education that maybe some folks don't feel comfortable approaching in a larger network.
Absolutely.
They provide for networking too, and a safety net, a sense of community.
And there's much needed in regard to communities who have been historically marginalized, having not only being valued because they're human beings, but also having value because they understand things that oftentimes others may not understand, and perhaps kind kind of the traditional, I'll call traditional chambers of commerce or traditional businesses. Now, the interesting thing that I find is that when people ask questions like that, why do you need? They don't know that they put themselves on blast, as what the young people say, that they lack in awareness, they lack in knowledge. They have some real basic gaps in their awareness and knowledge. And that's not a bad thing. We all need
Right.
to learn and need to grow. But oftentimes those questions are actually, I think, sometimes they're open and they're honest, but sometimes they kind of come off as, I would imagine in your cases, like, what do you like? We don't understand what you're doing, and why you even bother doing that? And so sometimes it might be critical. The question may be asked in a critical sense, but but they're also making everyone aware, at least in that situation, that they really don't understand the histories of their own communities in which they're leaders in and they're business leaders in.
Yeah.
How can you not know, and how can you be a leader and not understand that there has been a history of economic exclusion, that these things have played out in housing and who can get housing?
That's
and
right.
what's the number way you build wealth in the United States?
Right.
Through your home, and the ways that people did not have access to mortgages historically. And I was speaking to a member of the Chinese American community, and we were just discussing how in 1950, when the family bought their home, they could not buy it until that time because of the redlining things that said that Chinese Americans and Asian Americans in Stockton, California, could not live on north of a certain divide line. And I know that because I was red line. My family was on the red line district when we grew up on South Lincoln Street. And all the communities, all the Latino families and all the African American families and Asian American families, we were all living together. But that, the folks that bought their houses in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, those things did not change until 1950. We were having a conversation about that. But so many people almost were unaware of those things, and they're leaders right now.
Yeah, that's a very true statement. And I think that you're right when you hear comments like that. I think it's an opportunity to educate and provide some background on why it's so important. And I've found that when I have explained that, that the response is understanding.
Yes.
You're right. It was a lack of awareness. That said, it can get frustrating to repeat yourself. But I think that at the end of the day, what I want to see is I want to see resolutions. I want to see change. I want to see betterment in my community. And so doing whatever that takes is really important. And I think that when we explain things to people and give them that additional mindset about where there are some real challenges, and people are not always starting from the same place in life, and they receive that kind of understanding that there is a willingness to change. And I'll give you an example. There was a local program that was launched, and it used an electronic device. You were able to help disperse important funding to local businesses. And in the beginning, there was no multi-language outreach in the program. It kind of lacked any kind of explanation there. There was a systemic distrust for many of our Spanish-speaking businesses that don't necessarily frequently, their customer base doesn't frequently use electronic devices to transfer any kind of funding. And so there was an unwillingness to take that on. And it took a lot of education and outreach. And our local Hispanic chambers stepped up to the plate to do that. There were other organizations throughout the county that helped with multi-language outreach. And I think that was really important, but it needed to be said out loud, and there needed to be an awareness that those corrections needed to be made.
Absolutely.
I don't know if there was equitable change in that particular instance, but there certainly was change.
And that's where you have to begin this work.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So let's talk. Tell me a little about your upbringing. Yeah, and because identity is a part of who we are, and we have multiple identities, right? You're a powerful presence. You're optimistic. You're engaging, and you know how to bring people together. There had to be people, there had to be circumstances, and there had to be experiences that you've had that helped you develop in the way in which you do your work now. This is an invitation to share any parts of that, individuals, experiences, places you've been that have been part of your formation, the formation of who you are becoming.
Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I wish I could claim myself as a hometown Stocktonian, but I can't.
But you are a Stocktonian now.
I am.
And you're living at large.
Yes. And I love this city. It will be my forever home. But I grew up in Oregon, and I grew up with, I was very fortunate. I had loving parents. And a loving support net around me. My father passed away very unexpectedly when I was 14 years old. And that was challenging for me because I lost an entire segment of my family when that happened. And my mother was very independent and spirited. She, hardworking, single mother. She did door-to-door advertising for many years, and then worked her way up in her career. And I just saw how ambitious she was, and I watched that. And she also had high expectations for both her daughters. I won't say I always lived up to that, but certainly I grew up with that same spirited independence.
Yeah.
And so when I moved to California, I probably didn't always do things the traditional way, but I've always had a desire to grow myself in some capacity. And I've also never been afraid to grab hold of an opportunity. Not every opportunity is the right one.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I've learned when to hold my cards, so to speak. But when I've been given what oftentimes presents itself like a very scary opportunity in front of me, but if I do it, I know I have the capacity to grow.
Yes.
I tend to be one of those people that I just jump in.
Okay.
And I go for it. And then I don't look back. And that has been probably something that has helped guide me in my career. I may have done things in an untraditional manner, but I sought out how to do things that I thought could grow me professionally, but that I could also do something that was making some kind of a difference. And I've been very fortunate now to be in the position that I am, working for a company that cares deeply about its community. And I feel good about being a part of Stockton and being a part of something that is creating good here.
That's beautiful. So talk to me about you were recognized, awarded, acknowledged in 2015 by the Athena International Organization and the Greater Stockton Chamber of Commerce with a Young Professional Leadership Award. So that was the 2015, that's like 7 years ago. So you were identified early on as someone that was an up-and-comer, and the San Joaquin Lifestyles magazine also recognized you as 40 under 40.
I don't think I qualify for
Yeah,
that
we don't
anymore.
qualify that. I made that list a while back, those types of lists a while back. It's so funny when you find that on the internet. I was like, oh yeah, I forgot I was 40 under 40. That's a long time ago. But at any rate, here we are now. What do you think is going to be the important messages that you are taking forward in the work that you're doing with the leaders around these ideas of not just economic development, but inclusive economic development, not just, whatever it is that we're doing, but to take the lessons of what we've learned over the last 24, 36 months
Mhm.
about not all things have been fair with all people at all times. And it's not the issue of the individual or the family or the community that they came from that is actually systemic, it's structural, and we can actually connect things back to laws, exclusions that become policy, that becomes practices that gets embedded in society. I think all of us that are in steward roles, I think everybody's consciousness has been raised to
Mhm.
kind of be more aware to the evidence that and to hopefully change our narrative,
Mhm.
which moves from making people problem to looking at systemic problems, moving away from the individuals and putting all the blame on them, and let's look and see where's the policy opportunities that we need to have here. Let's talk a little bit about this idea of and what your ideas are around having equity and inclusion as really central in the leadership work that's happening right now. The policy work through whether it's iHub, tremendous policy work through major foundation like James Irvine, policy work through one of the probably most profoundly powerful statewide Hispanic chambers of commerce, which is the state of California. These are really powerful networks
Mhm.
or platforms, I should say. Um, how are you thinking about using what we've learned as a society about what equity is and what it does and what it demands
Mhm.
to kind of move the needle forward for communities in need?
Yeah. Well, so I'll start off by saying I think one of the things that's incredibly powerful to remember is that equal or equality doesn't necessarily equal equity.
Talk about it. Tell us
And
about it.
and I think that when you start talking about equity, you're talking about an equal distribution of power. And that's a very different discussion
It is.
than, well, we're all equal. And so I think it's really important to remember that in many of these discussions. And I think it's also something that's being reflected in a lot of the discussions that are coming out at the state level.
Mhm.
For instance, I mentioned earlier the Community Economic Resiliency Fund, which is
Yes.
SURF, otherwise known as SURF.
Otherwise, uh-huh.
The SURF discussions have been really groundbreaking in their approach to economic development because not only are they looking at this from a standpoint of community driven economic development,
Mhm.
they're saying it's not that your traditional economic development partners, whether it's government or
Mhm.
private sector,
Mhm.
or it's not that they're not important,
Mhm.
but we don't want them to lead in this discussion.
Mhm.
We want the community to lead, and then the economic development arms to support or mold or shift
Mhm.
um, the goals and outcomes. So it's an interesting concept in that it hasn't been done before at the state level. And,
Mhm.
and I think that it presents a lot of opportunity, messy opportunity
Yeah.
for a lot of folks.
Yes.
And it's definitely been a process. But one of the things that I think San Joaquin County did an excellent job at
Mhm.
was organizing in a meaningful and respectful way early on.
Mhm.
Um, there was outreach that was sort of overseen by 4 organizations within this county,
Mhm.
representing everything from private sector to, the sparks of innovation, to the community sector, to environmental justice and workforce development. So it kind of covered the gamut.
Yeah.
And what they did was very early on started having discussions with individual community-based organizations throughout the region,
Mhm.
and institutions throughout the region about joining this effort. about coming to the table and starting to talk about how we could participate in community-driven economic development that really impacts a larger region than just our county. Our SURF region is 3 counties. It's San Joaquin, Stanislaus, and Merced.
Okay.
So, but there was a lot of thought into making sure that at least there had been a strong attempt to connect with a really wide range of community stakeholders, and being thoughtful about that, and not engaging at the last minute, not saying, hey, why don't you come to the party? We've already baked the cake.
Absolutely, yeah.
But doing this work really early on and saying, we need you
Yes.
at the table to be a part of this discussion, and we need you to put your opinions out there.
At the onset and at the beginning.
Yes,
Yeah.
so that something is properly crafted with your input.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the literature calls this, will say that what you just described is that communities have the solutions that they need, but they haven't had the platform or the attention or been valued enough to
Power, yeah.
and ultimately the power to do so. And so these community-driven initiatives at the state level, it's taking what communities that have historically been marginalized. There goes that historic piece again.
Yep.
Because one of the things about equity, it is not equality, which you're absolutely right. And you can't do equity work if you're not historically conscious to the ways in which those very voices were excluded.
Yeah.
So equity work always deals with understanding the historic context.
Absolutely.
Of all of these issues. And so I love the way that the work that you're doing is really understanding that there is not only value, but there is great asset when you take any groups that have been marginalized and put them at the center of the conversation, where they actually are driving it. And it does take longer. You talk about it's a little messy.
Right.
First of all, the processes weren't made to include them. So now you include them, and their processes are not smooth.
Right. and then, quite frankly, you're dealing with trust issues too,
Yes.
because now all of a sudden you've put people in a position where they're able to drive these initiatives, but maybe they don't have the access to resources, expertise, whatever it is, to know how to implement something.
Absolutely.
So there has to be organic trust built.
Absolutely.
With other organizations or institutions, and that has to be developed. And I will say that I think looking at the SURF example, it's a bit of a pressure cooker situation, because you've got all these interests and all these folks, stakeholders that are engaged in this conversation, and yet you've got to come to some kind of not a solution, but maybe an objective.
Yes.
And
you got to move it forward.
Right.
Yes.
So how do you do that and still bring everyone with you? And so it's an interesting concept that I think we're going to see great results from.
Yes.
I am optimistic that this is going to be something that would be game changing, and perhaps it will be something that's modeled in other parts of the country.
Yes. And you know why? Because the title of this podcast is called Humanizing Us. And everything that you're describing, and the manner, the approach, the methodologies, are all humanizing ways of engaging an issue, are all humanizing ways of trying to solve these kind of big, hairy, difficult issues that none of us created, but we have inherited. And those of us that are leaders today have both a duty and a responsibility to kind of take these humanizing principles and engage it in our work. And that's what I wanted to bring, because I see that in your work, Brenna.
Thank
you. Move through humanizing engagement. And that's why people are coming to the table. And that's probably why people are being pushed forward. And by the way, the messiness is where the brilliance comes through, will eventually come through, and it is coming through. And it's, while it's messy, it's cathartic, and it moves from messiness to cathartic for those that need that. And it eventually moves to what the research calls to what they call liberatory spaces, where it becomes liberating, where a community begins to liberate itself through the process of the messiness. But we have to be willing to do that, and we need to create environments, which is what you're doing at SURF, so that that liberatory paradigm might be a paradigm that we haven't seen. And we might be able to experience it and see what's on the other side.
Yeah, I so agree with that. I think every major change that I've had personally in my life, my ability to learn to embrace the discomfort and then to push through that at a certain point, sometimes longer than others, you never know, is, I believe, what makes me stronger. And oftentimes provides me the most reflection, that I've had in my personal life. And so I believe that you need to be able to do the same thing in your professional roles. You have to be willing to sit in the discomfort and feel it so that you can push through to the next level. And I really do believe that. And I think it's that has been a liberating change for me, and something that I learned to embrace early in my life, and it has benefited me.
Wonderful. So tell me, what do you do? What are the most important things for you when you think about this idea of creating humanizing experiences as a leader at a company, a community leader, a thought leader? How do we kind of create these humanizing environments?
For me, I think what I try and do is look out into the community, or identify issues, really. Identify issues, challenges, opportunities for growth, and then connecting with whomever those stakeholders are, and then saying, what do you need? Where can I help? And I think that's a reflection of the culture of Spanos companies. I mean, that's really how they approach things. Where is it that we can
Where's
help?
the need?
Yeah. And so it's about keeping your eyes open, your ears open, and really connecting with people, and getting to know them on a personal level. I mean, I think that's just what you do. You have to break it down and just spend time making relationships. Some of my closest relationships today might seem like a very strange connection to other people, but it's really because I spent time in relationships, and in what I do and what I've done in my previous career. That's all it is. I mean, when you look at advocacy and politics and all that, it's all relationships.
It's all relationships.
And so I've always kind of approached my positions as being that convener role, like where can I thread things together and look for opportunities for growth. So that's just what I've always done.
That's beautiful. So what's next on the docket? I've been here for a year. I'm excited to be at Pacific. It's a great platform. I'm excited to be a part of the groups that you're pulling together. Anytime you ask me to be there, I'll be there. What do you think is next for us?
Well, I think from a community standpoint, I do think that now, so the SURF planning grant application was submitted.
Okay.
Which is excellent. In our region, our 3-county region, there was one application that was submitted. You look at other parts of the state and they had competing entities. So I think that positions us in a great place. I am hopeful that once the planning process starts, that's 18 to 24 months of speedy work that is going to need to be done in a very meaningful way.
Yes.
And then from there, hopefully, we'll see this region well positioned to take on some of the $550 million that's going to be coming from the state for projects that we'll be competing for statewide.
Yeah.
But I think that would be an excellent opportunity for us to find something that's really going to benefit the 3-county region.
Absolutely. And the University of the Pacific being an anchor institution, the oldest institution in the state of California, as far as higher education is concerned, first university, but being physically here at Stockton since 1924, and the role that this institution has played and continues to play in this region as both a cultural and an economic and an overall educational driver, we have to be and we will be central in that work. And so we're looking forward to just partnering with everything that you bring to the table and bringing just the best of everything that we have. In the studio today, our audience can't see it, but we have brilliant students here. We have, brilliant faculty who are engaged as teacher scholars and research and development that we think that matters. We always, focused with engaging our students in the community, and many of the people here are members and community leaders themselves, and so we're excited. And I'm personally, though, excited, just as a woman of color, to be doing this work at a time in the city that reared me and gave me the start that I needed, and to be back at the university that gave me the start that I needed.
And the university has truly been at the forefront of this issue. I think that they are the linkage that provides the opportunity for us to connect with much larger technological innovations and thoughtful impact, and that's really coming from our university leaders. So yes, I don't foresee that we could have a better asset than the University of Pacific in our backyard.
Well, this has been so much fun. I hope you've had a good time.
Great time. I'll come back anytime.
All right, then. So thank you so much, Brenna, for being here.
Absolutely.
Next time we'll have you to talk about one of the projects, particularly. Maybe we'll do a deep dive in another one.
Sure.
But it has been great just to introduce you to this community. It's a new community, Humanizing Us. And thank you so much for spending time with me today.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Thanks.